Hello and welcome to Deepdale Podcast. It's March 2024. We've just enjoyed our annual Deepdale Hygge Festival. Easter is coming this weekend when the clocks spring 1 hour ahead. Daffodils are in full bloom. The sun is making occasional appearances. Hares are performing dances and the sparrows are loving the new growth on our hedges. Spring is very definitely here. I'm Jason, and this month I'm chatting with Jake Fiennes, Conservation Director at Holkham Estate. We talk Holkham National Nature Reserve, regenerative agriculture, interconnectivity of wildlife-friendly landscapes, and the Holkham Estate looking back at its incredible agricultural history for inspiration for the future. And we have a soundscape from Deepdale Hygge, bands, dancing and laughter. Enjoy the listen, and we hope to see you on the beautiful North Norfolk Coast again soon.
Skies all open wide, geese go high and over. Oh, now you're a beachcomber, fistful of sandfire, sea, lavender, see you next year.
I am sitting in an office that's got most amazing views across the beautiful Holkham Estate, and I am chatting with their Director of Conservation, which is Jake Fiennes, a name that will ring bells for many of you, and Jake is raising his eyebrows just at the very mention of that. But Jake has an interesting portfolio which covers a whole lot of aspects of the estate, and Holkham has been part of the agricultural revolution for a very long time, and I think is now part of the new agricultural revolution towards kind of changing the way that we farm in the UK. So welcome to Deepdale Podcast, Jake. It's fantastic to have you on here, and thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure, and welcome to the finest office in Holkham. And the view is the National Nature Reserve, and in the winter, skeins of geese fly past my window, and in the summer, displaying lapwings and calling curlew. So it's a very pleasure to welcome you here.
It is absolutely lovely. It is really lovely, and your role covers all sorts of things, but the National Nature Reserve is very much at the heart of that, isn't it?
So my primary responsibility is the Nature Reserve. Other responsibilities are game, forestry, and also challenging the farms to make more space for nature.
Yep.
Whether that's the home farm, but also the tenanted farms, and also working beyond the boundaries of Holkham Estate and trying to influence government policy.
Keeps you entertained.
I have long days and short weekends.
How did you end up coming to Holkham? Because you've been here for a good few years now.
So I arrived on the 1st of November 2018. Was the start date, so that's a little over 5.5 years. I'm not a Norfolk blow-in, but I'm a North Norfolk blow-in. So prior to that, I'd spent 24 years working in South Norfolk, managing 5,500 acres just south of Norwich. And so I was approached by Lord Leicester, who rang me up as I was travelling to the NFU's headquarters in Stoneleigh, saying would I be interested in a position that he was looking to create at Holkham. And it's a pretty special position, actually. I'm very honoured to look after hugely important national but also an international asset of the Holkham National Nature Reserve, and overseeing the management of that. But also, as you referred to in your introduction, the history of Holkham. The history of Holkham of sustainable land management, food production, attention to care of natural capital, working within its farms but also its tenants, and the importance of people and landscape. So I do have a very special job, and I'm very privileged to be able to be a custodian for this amazing landscape for a period.
How big is the whole estate and how big is the nature reserve?
So let's talk old money, because that's easier for a lot of people. So Holkham Estate is about 25,000 acres, and the Holkham National Nature Reserve, owned by Holkham, this is where it's slightly complex. So the National Nature Reserve, which has been declared a National Nature Reserve since 1967, is in its total area is just under 10,000 acres. Wow. Yeah. Everything above the mean high water mark is owned by Holkham, and that's about half of it. The rest of it is owned by the Crown Estate and managed by Natural England, and that's the sandy bit that spends 12 hours of the day underwater.
Yep.
So sand dunes, pine woods, freshwater marsh, saltwater marsh is owned and managed by Holkham, and that occurred. Holkham took over full management of that area in 2017 when it got Section 35 approved body status. That is effectively unconditional consent from Natural England to manage the SSSI. That's a significant part of my role. Forestry, we have 1,000 hectares or 2,500 acres of woodland. Yeah. Most of that surrounding Holkham Hall within the park, but also the pine woods, which there's nearly 300 acres of pine woods, which is the iconic landscape of the North Norfolk Coast, a feature that everyone recognises. There's the Holkham game interest with a long history of, men in tweed and bowler hats. That's a long history that allegedly Holkham, the home of driven game shooting.
Didn't the bowler hat get invented here?
Interesting story where allegedly it was called the Cook hat, but it was Mr. Bowler that made it, so he got the credit. The bowler hat or the Cook hat,
and it was like a safety hat, wasn't it? For in
Holkham
theory,
doing it 200 years ago. Holkham was doing health and safety at a whole different level.
Well, in the theory that it stopped a bit, poacher smacking on the back of the head because of the brim and
that was
sort of stuff.
The general idea. So the history of game, the importance of woodland and a designed landscape and how you maintain that landscape, the nature reserve and the millions of people that visit the nature reserve, but also the nature within it and how we balance that. Working with the farm teams, and we're in a huge transition within agriculture where farmers, whether they're owner occupiers or tenants, are now the way we're supporting farm businesses has changed. As opposed to having incomes for just occupying land, there's now an expectation that farmers will deliver public services and government will reward them when they deliver those services. And we're sort of halfway through that transition. So that, I think, was another key reason for the creation of my role, is to see how I could assist Holkham in navigating that. That has been anything but straightforward.
Yeah.
We've had something called Brexit. We've had something called COVID. We've then had the war in Ukraine, which had a huge impact on commodity prices and volatility. We have something called climate change, Sid bubbling away in the background. So it hasn't been straightforward, but we're navigating it, and we're trying to do what we consider the best for the land. We are, all of us, whether we're the owners or the managers or the boots on the ground, we are here for a period to ensure that we maintain it and enhance it and hand it over to the next generation in a better condition than we took it on. So I'm here as a temporary caretaker to hand the baton on to someone else, and they might have a difference of opinion, but that's how land works.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you describe Holkham as moving towards regenerative farming? You're moving away from I say traditional, but the last 60, 70 years of spray and plough and spray and plough and go from there.
Okay, so organic farming, we all know what that is. That's basically no artificial inputs, whether it's fertiliser or pesticides. Simple, straightforward. 3% of UK agriculture is organic. It's tiny. We then have this new movement which is being called regenerative agriculture. And that's got a bit of traction, but it's relatively small. Only 3% of farms in the UK are classed as regenerative. Regenerative agriculture isn't prescriptive, but it has principles. And we've seen in the intensification of agriculture through government policy, European policy, we saw the degradation of some of our natural capital assets, soil being the key one. So regenerative agriculture is a way, how can we manage and care for the land without reducing its ability to provide us with food? So sustainable agriculture. And if we then go back to the second Earl, Cook of Norfolk, and we look at the monument that sits in Holkham Park, a monument to agriculture, that monument just screams regenerative agriculture. Yeah. All of the inscriptions on each corner scream regenerative agriculture. So Holkham, I think, is looking at its past to try to deliver its future. Yeah. Regenerative agriculture still requires artificial fertilizers, although you try to reduce those because you look at nature-based solutions in providing your nutrients for your food crops through regen ag. It also has the importance of rotation. So many farms in the UK that I've seen, some of them are cereals followed by cereals in perpetuity. So that's not good for the soil. We have soil erosion through weather events. We're just coming out of the wettest winter possibly on record, and we've seen the most valued asset for food production flowing into our rivers and down our roads. So regenerative agriculture covers the soil through the year with cover crops, with back to nature-based solutions, trying to create something that just acts as a blanket, as a duvet, as the land is fallow through the winter before the crops are sown in the spring. The next principle of regenerative agriculture is try to reduce your tillage. That's not saying you might not plough, but it's trying to reduce it as much as possible. Another principle is bringing livestock in. Now, whether that be cattle or sheep, or that could be bringing in manures from elsewhere if you don't have livestock. So, coming to Holkham and seeing, and all the farmers that I meet a lot of farmers, and each farmer has a slightly different interpretation of regenerative agriculture, and that's a good thing, because the one of the key components that isn't referred to enough is the context of regenerative agriculture. So if you're a farmer in Northumberland, you're going to have a very different approach than a farmer in Norfolk. Yeah. So the Holkham's approach to regenerative agriculture is wider rotations. The farmer has an eight crop rotation. Holkham has livestock integrated into its food system. So we have the cattle that graze the nature reserve. When they're housed in the winter, the manures and the farmyard manures go back onto the fields. There's a flock of sheep that graze cover crops through the winter. So the cover cropping, there's hundreds of hectares of cover crops are applied every year at Holkham. So Holkham from my perspective, meets many of the principles of regenerative agriculture. But I could go 10 miles to the east, 15 miles to the south, and a farmer might have a different approach. And that doesn't bother me.
But the great thing is I find that regenerative agriculture people are very happy to discuss with each other about what it is they find that works and doesn't work. There seems to be almost a camaraderie between them, of kind of sharing ideas and saying, well, I tried that, it was tosh. Tried that, worked brilliantly. And
Holkham has done some experimental things and it didn't work. Yeah. So, we can create our own weed burdens. So we tried to find something that suits our system, suits our soil type, suits our location, our topography. There's a wonderful event that happens in Hertfordshire every year called Groundswell.
Fabulous event.
6 years ago, 500 farmers. Last year, 6,500 farmers. Farmers talking to farmers about farming and food production. No one selling Range Rovers and jacuzzis, and conversations in the aisles between sessions of knowledge exchange. So it's actually not being dictated to by anyone, but saying what works for them and what didn't. And maybe, I've got a farmer in the West Country who grows no-till potatoes. Holkham grows hundreds of hectares of potatoes. No-till potatoes just sound like way off sort of fantasy world. Is it going to meet market demands? I'm not so sure. Could it change that in 20, 30 years' time? Who knows, maybe. So I love that it's regenerative agriculture can be applied by each individual on how that suits them best. And what we mustn't do is criticise other people's application. Because we're a family and we've got to work together, and all of the pressures on land use, so we talk about food production as well, but there are many other pressures on land use. So we have a significant fall in biodiversity in my lifetime. A lot of the baseline studies of birds, for instance, were taken in 1970. That's the year of my birth. Some of the biggest declines. Let's look at farmland birds. Yellowhammer, 87% decline. Lapwing, 57% decline. Grey partridge, 97% decline. These species decline has happened in my lifetime. So we also have a responsibility to address that. And with 70% of land in some sort of food production, farmers have a role to play in that. There was a report that came out in 2019 called the Lawton Review. Professor John Lawton, who wrote a review called Making Space for Nature. And it talks about, and what I find about Holkham is it talks about how we do that and how we have core areas, high value nature, Holkham National Nature Reserve. Then we have how do we join those core areas up. So we need linear routes to join each core area up. So let's say we've got Cley Wildlife Trust Reserve. We then need to ensure that we have areas to join those up. But then we need to go into the hinterland, into the farmland, and have the stepping stones to allow nature to move. And that's not saying we're going to take large tracts of land out for nature, but we need to identify where we have the areas will have greater value for nature without having impact on food production. And we can do that through crop yields. We can do areas, if we look at the chalk streams on the North Norfolk Coast, the Burn, the Stiffkey, the Hun, there are areas adjacent to those rivers that aren't suitable for producing high quality, high yielding food. They're best suited for nature. We're acutely aware of all of the states of our rivers throughout the UK. Chalk streams are a very, very rare habitat. In North Norfolk, we are blessed to have, I think, 6 chalk streams. So we have a responsibility to look after those. We are told that sewage outfall is hugely damaging to our water systems. It is, but it's trumped by agriculture. Agriculture is a bigger pollution to water through phosphates rather than sewage outflows. So agriculture so we can identify these areas where we can start to have the hotspots to allow nature to work its way through our landscapes, and then we can have the veins, so the grass margins or the field corners or the cultivated areas that abut our hedges. We have over 500,000 miles of hedgerows in the UK. That's more miles than sealed roads. So those are the veins. Our hedgerows are the veins that connect nature. So I'm of the firm belief that we can have this balance where we can produce healthy, nutritious, sustainable, environmental, economic food alongside high value nature. The frustration is that report came out in 2019. We then had the 25-year environment plan. We had Health and Harmony, another government paper. We had payment for public goods. We've just had recently the environmental improvement plan. We've talked about it a hell of a lot. Now we need to start doing something. And in this agricultural transition where nature is being valued, we had an announcement by the Secretary of State Steve Barclay in January at the Oxford Farming Conference, where we see payment rates recognising existing high value areas and also the creation of new ones. So farmers can get paid over £800 a hectare for growing flowers. I'm not for one moment suggesting that every farmer grows flowers, but where you can grow flowers well, in areas, we've lost 97% of our hay meadows, and I'm not suggesting we're going to recreate 97% of our hay meadows, but we need to strategically know where we need to put them and then value those that deliver. I'm a big fan of baselining. So before we make land use change or management change, we actually get an understanding of what we're doing, and we've done that at Holkham on one particular farm, and we've then implemented change and we've seen the effect that we've had. And when it's done, when it's targeted and thought about, you actually can make quite a big difference quite quickly.
Well, we've noticed that at Deepdale, I started by looking into taking the kind of crappy corners out of the fields and realised that felt very piecemeal, and then as we started sort of working that through and adjusting, and the difference that we've made in our soil quality and the difference we've made in terms of the wildlife is just astronomical, in a very short period of time, really, and it feels amazing when you're watching that happen. It's just great.
When you think about it, nature is very forgiving.
Yeah.
You can give it a hard time for decades, and actually you give it a bit of space to breathe, how quickly it can bounce back.
Yeah.
So, and this needs to, 25,000 acres, a 10,000 acre nature reserve, you think big scale, it's not sufficient. Nature doesn't work like that. Everyone needs to participate. Yeah. Some will do more than others, but actually it's that collective approach and that connectivity and that catchment area application that actually make a difference. We have a government commitment to protect 30% of land and sea for nature by 2030. I don't believe we're going to meet that target, and depending on who you speak to, we're currently at between 3 and 6% of land that might qualify for that. But actually, if we get 10 or 15 by 30, I think we need to celebrate that. Our generation is the ones to start to put in the foundations for change, to then hand the baton on to the next generation to implement it. We have commitments to halt species decline by 2040. That's a big ask. To reverse species decline by 2050, that's an even bigger ask. But can we do it? 5 years at Holkham, changing the way we manage the nature reserve, changing the way we graze it, changing the way that we manage the water levels, changing the way we manage predators. We start to see significant benefits to a range of species. I was recently asked, what are the key indicators of success for nature? It's about diversity and abundance. And if I look at the data that comes back from my team that will be going out from the 1st of April right through to the middle of July, monitoring all of the species on the reserve, we get to track those changes. We don't think we're doing anything radical. We're just doing good nature conservation, good land management. We made a wetland wet, and nature responded to that. So we see an abundance of a range of species, we're not targeting single species, but we see an effect on a range of different species, from overwintering geese. This year, 70,000 pink-footed geese, that's 70% of the Norfolk population, spent Christmas here. We see our overwintering population of lapwing and widgeon breaking records because the site is favourable to them. We see our breeding population of lapwing back to what it was across the Holkham coastline, back to what it was 20 years ago. We haven't reversed the we just started to bring them. We see marsh hares and spoonbills and reed bunting and natchak toads and orchids. We see a range of different approaches. Then we also, within the climate change perspective, we see species migration, where some of their previous places were less favourable, so they're looking to breed elsewhere. We had a breeding attempt of a black-winged stilt, something that you expect to see in southern Mediterranean. We've seen cattle egret, the first breeding cattle egret, something that you have an image sitting on the back of a buffalo in Africa, breeding at Holkham for the first time. We see a bird mainly associated with the west of England, the raven. We have ravens breeding back at Holkham. So we also got to understand, with climate change and species migration, that Norfolk hawker dragonfly historically was exclusively in the Broads, and has marched forward across the UK, and we're now seeing that in abundance on the reserve. So it's invertebrates, it's flora, it's bird life. When you start to make changes, you don't say, well, I'm going to make changes and that's going to be specifically going to have an effect on A, B, C, D and D species. You have to kind of let nature
decide
what it
yeah.
wants to do.
Yeah.
And that same applies. When you say nature reserve slightly easier because a lot of the ingredients were there, but actually on the farmland, a lot of the time is let the landscape tell you what it wants. So something that I'm a big fan of within the farm landscape is cultivated margins. So these are areas that are cultivated for annual plants. Poppies, mayweed, cornflower, corncockle, weasel snout, pheasant eye. There's wonderful names of all these rare arable plants. Well, it's really cheap because all the seed bank is there.
Yep.
And it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to go to a seed merchant to buy all these flowers. It's there. It's free. It's nature.
Although we did get told by DEFRA when we put in our scheme that there wasn't any agricultural weed plants in Norfolk because they still hadn't read the report that FWAG had written for them 12 years previously. So it was a slightly frustrating conversation, but when seeing the beautiful flowers that came up when we started putting in the cultivated margins were just glorious.
I had the same issue, and luckily the Norfolk Flora group, who go out, volunteers and go out and monitor these species, and I asked, have you got any records of rare arable plants at Holkham? They came back with a spreadsheet with 97,000 records. So it was a big sort of up yours, Denver. So because we know this is this very unique soil type, sandy loam over chalk, actually is arable plant heaven. So something we can do. And one of the Holkham tenants I put into a scheme 2 or 3 years ago, and just the visitors to the coast coming down the dry road, seeing his fields buffered by red ribbons of poppies, just actually a sense of arrival. You've come to North Norfolk. So if we can all do it, so it's great for nature. It's great for a sense of a landscape and this what it can do, and people will associate North Norfolk with not just beaches, not just lovely pubs and lovely campsites, but also incredible wildlife and countryside.
Yeah. If people listening to the podcast, people coming to stay with us at Deepdale, want to come and visit some of what is on offer at Holkham, what's accessible in terms of access, in terms of kind of what they can actually see?
So the nature reserves. So there is parking at Lady Anne's Drive. There's parking if you want to go to the Wells Beach end. There's parking there. There's limited parking at Overy, which is a public car park, but it floods periodically. So
you have to be careful. You need to check the tide times.
Check the tides.
Yeah.
But actually, interesting. There is a network of footpaths, and as we roll out these, so the Warham Greens, which is the coastal path that runs between Wells and Stiffkey. Mm-hmm. So you could park at Stiffkey and walk to Wells. Actually, all of those arable fields adjacent to the salt marsh have cultivated areas, and so it's wonderful seeing on social media some of the work being recognised by people you've never met. Yeah. So you suddenly see pictures of, so fields of poppies or fields of sunflowers. So it's even within, what we're trying to do is ensure that we engage people with what we're doing rather than hiding it behind hedges. Yeah. We're just about to coppice a hedge along the coast road because we've had a private investment into land use change. So on the coast road, adjacent to the nature reserve, we've sown a field with over 50 species of flowers and grasses, and we're going to coppice the hedge specifically to let the 6.5 million people that drive along the coast road to see it. Lovely. We want them to make its way. So what's really exciting is this year is its first flowering year. So we're just going to have, when everyone couldn't see, but you'll also see the wetland and the pines, and you'll have a view that people didn't have before.
So which road is that? So if people are saying, well, how do we see this? Which
That's road? On between Deepdale and Holkham Village.
Yep.
It's on the left, just as you hit the wall.
Yep.
So the Holkham wall. So you will
Preferably don't hit the wall while looking at the beautiful field.
Yeah, we need to put a go slow sign, flowers.
Yeah. Look left, but be aware of the wall and oncoming traffic. Yeah.
So we are. So it's very important from my perspective to make it very visible and for people to see the changes. You know, I get compliments. I get compliments from the guy that cut the hedges. So I had a conversation with him on maybe we should cut hedges like this, and maybe you shouldn't cut them every 2-3 years. You should evaluate each hedge on how you're going to cut them. And because we have the great and the good come to North Norfolk because they've discovered this amazing place, I get compliments on his hedgerow management. And each time I forward that on to him to say, you created this and everyone's recognising what you're doing. So hopefully others have seen the landscape change. You know, I've been here for a little over 5 years. I'd never come to Holkham before I came to Holkham. So I don't really know what it was like before. But listening to others, I had someone come and visit me yesterday who hadn't been here for 8-9 years and said, wow, what a difference. So it has changed. If you haven't been here for a long time, come back and let Deepdale know what you think about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It's lovely to talk to you. I've been to Groundswell, a couple of times, and there's just the excitement between farmers and the camaraderie between farmers about a change and a difference, and nature being a big part of that. It's just wonderful to be. So, you know, even if you're not a farmer, go along to the Groundswell because you'll just be massively impressed by the wonderful things you can learn about bees and creepy crawlies and fungi.
And the first night at Groundswell, Andy Cato, who is Groove Armada, does a DJ session.
And the bar's fantastic. The pub, it's with the Earthworm Arms.
Earthworm Arms, yeah.
Great, well worth. And the food that the street food they serve there is, or the country food that they serve there is just absolutely delicious. But no, thank you so much, and it is wonderful watching the kind of the changes, and it's really nice having Holkham as a neighbour, and not so that we don't feel like we're kind of out on a limb with what we've been doing at Deepdale. It's been great to know that, you know, we've got neighbours who are all doing similar things, with Wild Ken Hin on one side and now Sandringham changing as well, and, you know, and here and stuff, and it's just, you feel part of a community that isn't insane, whereas, you know, at times we did wonder whether we were doing something very abnormal.
And we're creating connectivity.
Yeah.
And I from the hill, I look over your farm and I see it transition, and I see our bird populations drop as you're become more favourable, and then they settle down. So it's just year on year seeing the changes is very exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing more. And, you know, you can find out a lot more about Holkham on their website, holkham.co.uk, and look up the Nature Reserve website. There's so much good information on there and so much to see. But the most important thing is to get out here and look, and actually bring a pair of binoculars, and you can just discover what's here. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Deepdale podcast. Lovely to have your ears. We produce this podcast to hear from inspirational people, those in the know about this beautiful part of the world, those who create both artisans and musicians, and other interesting people we enjoy chatting to about North Norfolk. You can listen back to previous episodes by searching Deepdale Podcast in any good podcast directory or app. And we'd love you to leave feedback, hopefully positive, and tell your friends and family about this little slice of North Norfolk life. We leave you with a soundscape from Deepdale Hygge, our annual celebration of the beautiful North Norfolk Coast, which took place last weekend. You'll hear laughter and dancing at our Friday barn dance with Whirligig Ceilidh Band, snippets from sets by Wendsum, False Colours, Paulusma and Kitewing. All of us singing happy birthday to our amazing sound man and all-round electrical whiz Tim, and lastly, laughter from Tony's Laughter Workshops. Enjoy.
art punk fits in quite nicely, I think, with our jangle folk. Sitting there with egg on your face. That's not a sandwich, it's a bleeding disgrace.
Then it might bloom into flames. Pass me the matches, help me set it on fire. This paper cathedral, made of words and of wire.